This controller has a few features that aren't on any other controller, and it does a few things better than some other fighting game controllers, but it does fall down in one area. We're going to talk about it all today. It's the BinBok Ultra Pro controller. I am using it here in Street Fighter 6 to test it for fighting games, but this controller can obviously do a whole lot more than just fighting games because it is a pro controller. I'm using it here on PC, but the main thing is that it's actually set up to be a Switch Pro controller. Full disclaimer, BinBok did send me this review unit for the purposes of making this video, but I've not been instructed to say anything specific, and all opinions are my own. We've got all the standard stuff you'd expect to see on a Switch Pro controller. You've got two nice analog sticks, you've got a D-pad, you've got shoulder buttons, you've got R1, R2, L1, L2, and then you've also got a few things that do random stuff, like you can change the color. You've got an LED button. But the cool stuff happens when you turn the controller around. It does not have just 4 shoulder buttons, it has 6. R4 and an L4 button. You also have back buttons, and this is a very common thing on pro controllers, and it's extremely useful for all sorts of games. If you're playing FPS games and you want to switch weapons really quickly, you can do this without taking your thumbs off the thumbsticks to press these buttons. And if you're playing things like fighting games, it's super useful because you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 buttons here on the front, 5, 6 on the right side, 7 and 8 over here on the left. Then you've also got 9, 10, 11, 12. For a game like Street Fighter 6, you're limited to 11 buttons, but this gives you plenty of choice because then you can have all of your action buttons on the right side of the controller and all your direction stuff on the left. So already the BinBok Ultra Pro controller is very exciting for fighting games just because of the sheer number of buttons you've got on here. But it starts to get even more exciting when you look at the options here on the back. We have a number of cryptic codes here on the back. This one actually turns on the gyro, so if you're playing an FPS game, you can actually tilt the controller. You've also got a no dead zone switch. The benefit, of course, is that you spend no time moving around in the dead zone. As soon as you touch the controller a little bit, it is going to start moving the controller. In the FPS games I tested, it did seem to work, but in Street Fighter 6, it seems like I still have a dead zone. Maybe that's built into the game. And then last but not least, we have a trigger keys switch, which is supposedly a special feature. To me, this isn't, I just wouldn't really count this as a special feature, but it is convenient to be able to switch this from trigger mode to being a full trigger. And this doesn't actually change the travel of the button, but it means it will respond as soon as you touch it, even just a little bit like so. They actually cause the controller to vibrate every time you switch them on or off. So you have feedback telling you that you have definitely turned a feature on or off. You would even be able to switch it on and off while you were not looking at it. You could just use your fingers on the back of the controller to do it on the fly. You probably wouldn't. You can see that we've also got a turbo function, which could be useful if the game you're playing doesn't have an auto fire mode. We've also got the remapping button. If I hold this down and press any of these extra keys, the back buttons, I can remap them to be other things. And finally, this button, which looks like the ocean, basically sets the level of vibration. So you can have it on strong, less strong, a little bit less strong, or off. Now, straight off the bat, this is already quite impressive because for $56 or $56.99, whatever the price is now, it has a lot of features that you don't get on the official Nintendo Switch Joy-Con, but you also get the wireless dongle, which it's plugged in right now, so I can't show it to you, or you can connect over Bluetooth, and you can also use the USB-C port on the back for a wired connection if you've forgotten to charge the battery, or if you just want a safer connection that's not going to be subject to Wi-Fi interference. And then one thing that you also don't get on most controllers is this. It's a removable battery. I haven't seen this since the Xbox 360. But enough about the features. What you want to really know is how does it actually feel to use in game. So let's just jump straight back into Street Fighter and let me show you, because basically when I first started trying this controller, I was like, this feels suspiciously similar to other controllers I've used, and for many reasons you probably already realize, it does feel a lot like a variant of controllers that you may have already seen on Amazon as well, but it does have a number of unique features. Many companies are experimenting with the placement of these shoulder buttons, but by putting them right in line with the L1 and R1 buttons, it means that you really don't waste any space at all. In fact, you can actually just press both buttons using different parts of your index finger. So you can press the R1 and L1 with the knuckle of your finger, and you can use your fingertips to press these remappable buttons. Very, very cool if you're playing an FPS game, but if you're playing a fighting game, what I discovered is that it's actually not as useful as I had hoped, because in practice, it actually just gets in the way when I'm trying to switch between R1 and R2. Having to like go over this ridge, it's a bit like a skate ramp. It's very difficult to go from this button to this button without lifting your whole finger up just to jump over it. to get to this button. See, because it's in line with the normal R1 button, it actually cuts out a shape of the R1 button, and this becomes like an L-shaped button. So in fact, the only way I felt comfortable using this controller was to pull my fingers out like this and use the tips of my fingers, and it is okay, but as you can see, there's tension in the back of my hand now that I'm having them out like this. It's been sculpted really nicely and it feels super comfortable in my hand, but it means that my index finger falls naturally on the trigger, not the shoulder button. You can see that it's like a weird stretch. To use the shoulder button, I have to do this with my finger. For fighting games, it's a bit of an issue up here. It's actually fine on these back buttons. I really like these back buttons because you just push them. There's no like pushing with the tip or finding the point where it pivots properly. It's just like they just work. But the moment that you've all been waiting for, it's time to talk about the D-pad. And what's really interesting about the BinBok Ultra Pro controller is that it's actually better than a lot of other fighting game pad controllers, and let's have a look why. On a lot of other pad controllers, it's difficult to go from this to this. And the reason why is that I'm not pressing down, I'm actually pressing down forward. There are lots of games where crouch forward and a kick is a completely different move to just a standard crouching kick. But if I want to do it in Street Fighter, usually this will get missed on a lot of other controllers that are more expensive even than this one. And at $56, this one is beating a lot of the competition because I can do crouch forward and then I can roll my hand from here, from down forward, down, down back, back, and I can do the tornado kick. If I go from down back to down forward, down back to down forward, if you check my input history there in the corner, you'll see that down will get missed on a lot of other controllers, even more expensive controllers. But on the BinBok Ultra Pro controller, it never misses the down input. It always comes out, and I'm really, really happy about that. Do I think that it's because this has been really well designed? Not exactly. So one thing that I did find really interesting is that you can take the D-pad off like this. It doesn't actually come with any other D-pad covers, but the reason that the D-pad cover comes off is that this is actually, as far as I can tell, a stock part. And the reason I know that it's a stock part is because if I just rip the D-pad off another controller that I've tested in a previous video, if I slide this on here, isn't that interesting? It works perfectly. It's exactly the right shape and size, and I've still got the same benefits. I'm able to do my moves which have the down input come out perfectly. However, even though I've changed out this D-pad, it doesn't fix the main issue with it, and it's the fact that it skips diagonals. So even though it's better than other controllers because it doesn't skip neutral down, in exchange, you miss a lot of diagonals, and mostly the crouching diagonals. Neutral jump up, forward jump, backward jump. Not an issue. If you watch the input history carefully, you can see that even though I'm doing the motion carefully every single time, sometimes I'm not getting the fireball. I'm pressing down, down forward, forward. I should get the fireball, but sometimes it doesn't come out. Weirdly enough though, if I do a Shoryuken, it almost always comes out. And why is that? Well, weirdly in Street Fighter 6, it turns out the Shoryuken input is extremely lenient, and all you have to do is forward, down, forward in order to get a Shoryuken. You don't need the diagonal. It just kind of assumes that you were trying to get the diagonal. But if you're trying to do a fireball motion, that diagonal has to be there. And the same thing goes for the super input. If you don't have that diagonal in the super input, it won't come out. All you'll get is Dragon Punch instead. You need those diagonals to come out every single time. And if you're stuck doing this every time you're trying to do a fireball, if you have to push really hard into the diagonals every time, you're just going to drop combos all of the time. So that's the D-pad. Unfortunately, I think that's a critical issue, and it's going to make it very difficult to use when playing fighting games. But again, if you're mostly using this for FPS games or games where you're only really using the analog stick, not going to be an issue. In fact, some people play fighting games with the analog stick, and so of course you're not going to have a problem like that. But there's another point about this controller which a lot of YouTubers are going to absolutely love, which makes this controller feel premium. It's the fact that it's got clicky buttons. However, I'm here to tell you personally that I can't stand clicky switches in action buttons. So when you're in a game like Street Fighter, if you do a Shoryuken like this, you get a normal one. But if you press 2 punch buttons at the same time, you get the EX version. So the game is flexible. It does allow you to have like a 1-frame gap between the one punch and if you actually finally get both punches out. But it's not very flexible. So if you were to put too much delay in because the timing was off and you had like a 2-frame gap between the punch button and the 2 punches at the same time, then it's not going to register as an EX move. So you have to make sure that you actually press both punches at the exact same time. This is significantly harder if you've got clicky switches, because even though you've pressed them at the same time, the strength of your physical fingers are going to be a little bit different. Also, if you don't land right in the middle, then the pressure that you apply to each button is going to be a little bit different. Stop putting clicky switches in game controllers. Please, please, please. Now, as a short side note, I don't mind clicky switches for directional controls. I actually find it super helpful when I've got clicky switches and the directional controls, but for the action buttons, especially when you have to be pressing a lot of them at the same time, it's really frustrating. So honestly speaking, there's a lot of stuff that this controller does really well, and if you're playing Street Fighter 6, you might find that as a beginner player, you won't even notice any issues. It's when you start to do more difficult combos, when your fingers are moving a little faster, when you're doing slightly more advanced stuff. If you feel like you'll ever reach a slightly more advanced stage with your Street Fighter career or your fighting game career in general, you're going to want a controller that doesn't skip the diagonals. So that's about it for the BinBok Ultra Pro controller. I actually personally liked using it when I was testing it on FPS games because my fingers rest really naturally on the triggers and the analog sticks, and I don't even need to press the D-pad and the action buttons on the front very often. But if you are playing fighting games, the fact that it skips diagonals is going to be a serious issue. In practice, jumping over that back button in order to get from the buttons to the triggers, it just takes too long. Other than that, I've got to say, this feels way more expensive and has way more features than I expected. If you want way more features than are normally included at this price range, I really like this controller, and it's got a cool little LED thing that you can change the colors on the fly. It's got a dedicated button to changing the colors. But if you need it for fighting games, you'll need to carefully consider whether it's okay that it skips diagonals. Listen, that's all I've got time for today. Remember to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and check out this video next if you want to see reviews of other controllers which feel and look suspiciously like this one. I've been NihongoGamer. I'll see you real soon.